20 years since the discovery of the Titanic, the legendary ship still contains secrets. Get ready for a real-time trip to Titanic, seeing the ship in a way it has never been experienced before. Armed with new technology, James Cameron is seeking answers to haunting mysteries that could never be solved.
This is incredible.
Until now.
We are really in uncharted territories now.
Now, this is Mission Control. It's also the control room. This is TV production in the heat of battle, and this can get pretty crazy in here, but that's all natural. What is not natural about what's going on tonight is the fact that James Cameron is broadcasting live for the first time ever, almost 2.5 miles straight down from the Titanic. So let's check in with him right now. James Cameron, you just made history, sir. Congratulations.
Hey, thanks, John. Wasn't easy getting here, but we did it, and we're connected, and we're feeding a signal to you from 12,500 feet. Now that means that there's 12,500 feet of water over our heads, and that water is creating an awful lot of pressure on the steel sphere that we're sitting inside. I'm sitting here with Mike Arbuthnot, our archaeologist, and Anatoly Sagalevich, Dr. Sagalevich, and Anatoly invented the Mir submersible that we're sitting inside. What do you think, Anatoly? Are we going to be okay?
Oh yes, it's beautiful. I think one of the best around the world.
I agree. I agree 100%. Now, just so you don't think I'm sitting here playing Halo 2 at the bottom of the ocean, I'm actually flying a remotely operated vehicle whose name is Gilligan. And this is Gilligan. I don't know if you can see him there. He's the green sort of toaster on steroids. And he's actually a pretty small bot called an X-bot. And I'm going to come around and show you our submersible that we're sitting in. Oh, let me give you where we are. This is the forward well deck of Titanic, and you can see there that kind of tubular object is the mast, which collapsed during the sinking back in 1912 on April 15th as the ship broke up near the surface. And just around here to the left, down below, we've got a hatch that goes down several decks. That's the bunker hatch or hatch 3. We've got some deck winches over here, and we've got the electric cranes, and you can see the railing up there. That's at the B deck level, up above. So we're forward of the bridge right now on Titanic, and we're just sitting right on the deck with our submersible. I'll come around and give you a look at where we are. And this is, oh, you can see up above that light. That's Mir 1 up there. They're doing lighting for us right now, so you'll see something. Because this deep down, there is no light whatsoever unless we bring it ourselves. So here's where we're sitting. Here's where the Mir 2 crew are sitting right now. And you can see that it's a deep ocean submersible. It's just bristling with cameras and lights and hydraulic booms and manipulators. It's quite a machine. I'm going to come over here and give you a little closer look at the Mir. It's an amazing diving machine. It can go to 20,000 feet. And Anatoly did a fantastic job, and his team designing it and supporting us on this expedition, because we're doing some very unusual things. If you look down here on the left, that green bot there, that's Elwood. He's a veteran Titanic explorer, and he's going to be coming out with us later to do some exploring around the wreck. And we have another X-bot over here in the garage, and you can see the empty garage where Gilligan came from a few minutes ago. I'm going to fly a little closer to the Mir, and maybe we can take a look at ourselves inside, and we'll see ourselves inside. And that's what happens, is you get this strange sense of being in two places at once when you're flying an ROV. I know I'm inside the sub, but I also feel like I'm inside the vehicle. Should be able to see ourselves. So turn around, Mike, and wave to Gilligan. Hey.
Hello from the bottom of the sea.
And that's us inside there. Okay. Well, I'm going to get on with the job of exploration here. That's what we came here for.
Well, Jim, never let it be said that you don't perform well under pressure. A lot of pressure. Very well done, sir.
About 5,500 pounds per square inch of pressure, to say nothing of the pressure of doing live television.
Well, it looks great. Get into position, and we'll check in with you a little bit later on.
Awesome. We'll be here all week.
Now, for you folks at home, doing something like this, an exploration this complicated, is not just a linear process. It is filled with twists and turns and a lot of unpredictability. To get us here was quite a journey. We thought you might want to see what it was like for us the past 3 weeks.
This is Jim Cameron's 35th dive to the Titanic. For this and every dive, he's gotten there on one of the Russian Mir subs, among the world's deepest diving manned submersibles. This time, it's different, because for the first time ever, the Mir is linked to the surface by a fiber optic cable. That cable is how we're bringing you this special broadcast. The descent takes more than 2 hours. Most Mir drops are for sleep. Not this one. The cable is a constant worry. It is among the most dangerous parts of the entire mission. If the cable breaks, it could tangle in the sub and take it to the bottom. Jim descends with archaeologist Mike Arbuthnot. His mission is to help Jim get video images for the historic record. I spoke with him before the dive.
Titanic is going away. It's corroding as a result of Mother Nature. So we want to get in there and take a look at what is contained within Titanic before she's lost forever.
Emily Jadif is another archaeologist brought along for the mission.
Well, we're going to try and do a survey of unexplored portions of Titanic.
Laurie Johnston and Roy Cullimar, experts on the bacteria that is destroying Titanic.
At the bottom, and the rest is an iron ore deposit.
Ken Marshall has been studying Titanic's structure for 40 years. He will help guide Jim through the maze.
Corridor light fixture on Jim's way aft to the first-class lounge.
Don Lynch is a historian who knows the personal stories of the Titanic passengers.
You know, Colonel Gracie is there, who was like everywhere throughout the whole sinking. I mean, he was heroic in that way. I mean, he one of those personalities a lot of people didn't like, but he was everywhere at once and making sure every woman he saw got into a lifeboat.
Park Stevenson is an engineer who helps visualize Titanic's interiors.
Well, the Marconi apparatus was the ship's means of talking to the outside world. Right up on me.
He's got the experts, the technology, and one of the most experienced deep submersible crews in the world. Bits of the technology were developed separately for 9 months before the expedition began, but it wasn't until 3 weeks ago that Jim and his team could finally assemble and test the system with the Keldish's Mir submersibles. No one knew whether it would work. The first thing was to get down to the wreck and test the communications. It's a 2.5-hour descent that Jim has done many times, but never with a 15,000-foot tether of fiber optic cable. The cable from the sub joins one of the ship's inflatable boats, or ribs. The rib keeps aligned with the Keldysh and allows sound and picture to be transmitted back to mission control. To get those pictures back from inside the Titanic, there are 3 separate links which all have to function at the same time. It's a fantastic technical achievement. The piece that had never fully been tested before is the fiber optic link from submersible to surface. Making this work was an incredibly delicate operation and risky. The fragile optic fiber is wrapped in a casing with a 500-pound breaking strain. It was a double-edged sword. The cable was weak enough to snap easily if the 18-ton submersible jerks when taut. It was strong enough to completely foul up the submersible's propulsion system and long enough to get impossibly tangled if it was let out too quickly. During one of the practice dives, 6,000 feet below the surface, the worst happened.
I believe we're fouled, guys. The cable looks like it's going up, but it could be looping over us like this. It's hard to say. We should be paying out by now, but we're not. This is not a good condition, I tell you. I think we made a mistake. I think it's bad.
They were no longer worried about getting pictures back, but dealing with a potentially dangerous situation for the Mir team.
A loop came around the tail fin of the Mir, has caught. Now the cable won't necessarily break, and this is the dangerous part of this. It's a steel. It has a steel strength member. What happens if it bends, though? It'll attenuate the signal, so you lose communications, you lose video signal, but you're still hooked.
Mission control, anybody? Mission control.
We've got to monitor this closely as they're starting their ascent back to the surface. We're madly taking cable to try and keep the whole thing from fouling the sub and potentially doing something even worse.
The only thing the submersible could do was dump ballast and head for the surface. The challenge of trying to get real-time pictures from the wreck of the Titanic had just become abundantly clear to James Cameron.
Well, we sort of made TV history up to a point, right up to the point that it went and we got a loop over us somehow. I saw it on the tail camera, I saw it coming down. We tried to get out of the way, and I literally watched it come down, come right past the wing and hook under the wing.
The team also had problems with the ship's satellite communications. A parts failure meant that all satellite systems were down. Being 350 miles out to sea and beyond helicopter range, there was only one solution. If this can happen in 2005, it's a stark reminder of the desperate situation Titanic was in nearly a century ago, when communication was with a Morse code transmitter.
The card is dry, so that's good. It's a good sign so far.
Communication problems don't stop diving operations. During this two-leg, three-week expedition, Cameron had to make use of every precious minute underwater with the Mears. Now, this was the scene earlier today.
Is that it?
That's the wreck, huh?
It's faint, huh?
80 meters.
Too high.
80 meters, nice.
80 meters.
You told me 80 meters, and it was 80 meters. Yeah, baby.
So this is what the bottom of the ocean looks like, huh?
Well, you haven't seen the bottom yet, but you will. It's a religious experience the first time. You don't want to miss that.
All right.
Oh my God.
Wow.
We were very close. The bottom of the sea, baby. Bottom of the sea. And we're coming down fast, as promised. You're about to see a huge silt out, folks. Just follow the skid marks. They'll take you to Titanic. All skid marks lead to Titanic. Here, hand me the camera. We'll show you. Give me a little bit of leash here. There's Titanic. You see it? That's a perfect sonar portrait right there. That's Titanic. There's a hatch out here someplace.
I do see some debris here.
Right there, Toya. Right here. This is a piece. You see the hatch, Toya? Hatch is there. Look, there's the dent. There's the dent on the side. It's Titanic, dude. Check it out, huh? Just to show folks in Mission Control that we're really at Titanic. We're not making this up.
Okay, get ready. Here you go.
You see it? There's Titanic right there, guys. Pretty cool, huh? Sweet. Okay, roger that. We're going to come up into position at the bow. We're going to split the bow crane with you. We will go on the right side of the bow crane. You go on the left. But don't forget, after that, we're going to make a diagonal over to the wreck's starboard deck house. So that's a slight diagonal across the across the forecastle toward you, so give us a little room to do that. This is hatch 1, and this is the hatch we just saw out on the debris field, the exact hatch. Look, you can really see down the hatch. Very nice.
The submersible is piloted to the actual hatch over which the metal cover, now 80 yards in front of the ship, used to be securely fastened. With no other debris forward of the wreck, there's no obvious explanation for its position. As Titanic descended, it assumed a stable nose-down angle. The ship sucked thousands of tons of water down with it as it fell. When it slammed into the seafloor, hydraulic forces inside the ship blew the hatch cover off, and then the downblast of water flung it far out in front of the wreck. This large dent is a clue to how the hatch cover got here, and Cameron discusses it with his team back on Keldysh.
There's an interesting forensic note here. The hatch combing on hatch 1 is intact all the way around. The hatch itself has a huge dent inside of it. That hatch was not knocked off by something. It was blown off by hydraulic pressure, snapped all the bolts, and it was flung forward. I still maintain the only thing it could have hit was the anchor crane at the bow. Somehow it got from here over the bow and out 75 meters onto the sediment in front of the ship. The only thing that's in that flight path is the anchor crane. Now, it might have come down and banged onto the top of the anchor crane if it kind of flipped up and the current hit it, cartwheeled it up. And I actually think it came off like a frisbee. I think it blew forward, hit the anchor crane, and spun, and it spin stabilized, which took it out as far as it went. So this is the base of the mast here. And when we were here in 2001, the mast was still almost perfectly intact. Probably hadn't changed shape since the ship sank, you know. So you can see it's collapsed down. It's just touching the hatch combing on the port side on hatch 3. This is hatch 3 or the bunker hatch. And this is the crow's nest door. And that's right where Frederick Fleet would have come out to come on watch that night. Right there.
May well have been the last person to pass through that doorway.
Oh, I'm sure he was.
Iceberg! Right ahead! Iceberg! Right ahead!
When the fatal berg was first seen, Titanic was heading straight for it.
Auto!
The lookout's warning averted a head-on, but the 48,000-ton ship sideswiped the iceberg, buckling the hull and opening seams along 300 feet of her starboard side. Titanic was designed with a series of watertight compartments separated by bulkheads. The ship could stay afloat with her 4 forward compartments flooded, but the iceberg opened 5 compartments to the sea, and Titanic was doomed. As flooding pulled the bow down, the stern was lifted out of the water. Tons of force from the unsupported stern flexed the ship, and finally broke its back. Still attached by the double keel, the flooded bow pulled the stern almost vertical before tearing itself free and going down like a torpedo, snapping the mast and tearing off the bridge. 10 minutes later, after a 2.5-mile fall, Titanic plowed into the ocean floor, embedding its bow 6 stories into hard clay. It's here that Cameron and his team will focus their exploration.
Okay, John, we are heading aft over the deck house right now, over the officers' quarters, heading for the grand staircase. All right, this is the grand staircase right here, coming up. And there it is. You're looking right down into the curve of the A deck level. Okay, Mission Control, we are starting bot ops. I'm just backing Gilligan out of his garage right now. His fiber optic tether is starting to pay out. Coming about, and okay, ready to roll. We're just about to head down the stairwell now, and we're going to go down actually 6 decks. Okay, just straight forward, right over the edge. That's it. Okay, got you. This was a beautiful carved oak staircase. It went down, we're on the boat deck level right now. It went down A deck, B deck, C deck, D deck, and down to E deck. This is our kind of main elevator that we use to get up and down through the ship. It really allows us to get to all the different deck levels on Titanic. So in a way, it's a blessing.
The fate of the grand staircase has always been a mystery. The centerpiece of the ship and perhaps Titanic's most opulent feature. Down this staircase, Titanic's wealthiest passengers, members of high society from Europe, America, and Canada, made their grand entrances to the dining room. This was the place to be seen.
Titanic's grand staircase was really, by far, in my opinion, the most dramatic, exquisite interior feature. It extended from the boat deck all the way down to F deck. The really elegant part of the staircase went from the boat deck to E deck. That's 6 decks. And it was made out of pale English oak and beautiful gilded wrought iron and bronze balustrades all the way down. It must have been really spectacular to stand at the boat deck and look all the way down to the E deck level there, down all those 6 decks. Of course, it certainly doesn't look like that today. It's all gone.
The fate of the grand staircase has always been a mystery. Initially, it was thought that it had collapsed into the heart of the ship, but there's no sign of it. There's still plenty of wood preserved in the wreck, so it's surprising that a structure this solid is no longer there.
You see, I think that the whole stairwell just lifted right out, the wooden stairs, leaving only the foundation. And these girders are just collapsed parts of the dome and so on from overhead that fell in when the ship hit the bottom. You'd have so much lift off that much wood and nothing holding it down because it was designed to be held in place, you know, more by gravity than anything. And we just stumbled upon that by accident when we were making the movie. And we sank our set and the staircase broke loose and floated up. It actually created a pretty dangerous condition because we were all in the set and suddenly this thing came roaring up underneath us. It was pretty wild.
In the meantime, I kind of want to ask Don if any of these survivors or if there are any reports of the grand staircase popping out in one piece.
Well, they're not necessarily one piece. Jack Thayer thought that he saw the bow of the ship come up out of the water, which we wonder now if that was maybe the staircase. And one of the survivors was found floating on a piece of staircase and he was picked up by a lifeboat. But he didn't say in his account how big a piece it was. And really, it couldn't have been too huge, I don't think, because it was just him and one other man on it. So at least there is some record of what we think is the staircase appearing, but nothing definitive.
Interesting. Well, it sure did leave a big hole, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Now, John, we've just come over to the port side of the ship. I'm actually flying Elwood, and Mike's got Gilligan. We're on the port boat deck, and this is a winch, which would have been used to raise the lifeboats, pull them back on board after a lifeboat drill, but they didn't use this winch. That winch was never used. And here's the deck house, and you can see the windows. Some of them still have the glass. Incredible. Look at that. These were first-class cabins here. I'm going to move in on this window so you can see the glass. And if we look around here to our left, we'll see the broad expanse of Titanic's boat deck. There it is, going all the way off forward to the bridge. We called it the boat deck because this is where the lifeboats were. And of course, during the sinking, this was the scene of a lot of the action during the night. Now, what you would have seen here is the davits for the lifeboats. They would have been standing up about 12 feet tall. The boats are about 30 feet long. There were 4 of them along here. And people would have been standing around not knowing what to do. If we were to look up, we'd see the #1 funnel, a big smokestack, and steam would be venting out of that because they were venting off the steam from the boilers because they were at full speed when they hit the iceberg. Yeah, so now the officer's trying to tell people, get in the boats. But they can't understand them over the steam. You've got the ship's orchestra playing, They're right down here on the other end. They're hearing ragtime music. You know, it's light and perky. So there's this strange mixture of a thinly veiled hysteria with this almost surreal sense of calm. And as the passengers came out, they were mustered on deck by the officers, and they were told to get into the lifeboats. Ladies first, women and children first, and they didn't want to go. And I'll show you why. Come over here to the edge and look down, and this is what they would have seen: just blackness.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to begin boarding the lifeboat. For the time being, QM, I require only women.
Now, the ship was 6 stories above the water. It was a moonless night, and it just looked cold and black and desolate out there. And it was so warm and comforting here on the ship. If I just turn around here, current. So really what it was is a sense of denial at this stage. They were in a state of denial. Right over here is where we had Lifeboat 6. Lifeboat 6 would have hung here in its davit. You know, the thing that's incredible about Boat 6, right where we are right now, is that there were so many people involved in the history of that night on Boat 6.
Well, Lifeboat 6 is really one of the most interesting lifeboats for the different characters that it had in it. You had Frederick Fleet, who was the first man to see the iceberg, the lookout.
Iceberg! Right ahead!
You had Robert Hitchens, who was the quartermaster at the helm at the time of the collision. And then, of course, the unsinkable Molly Brown, this Denver millionairess who was made famous by the sinking of the Titanic for the way she took charge of the lifeboat once it was out on the water. Major Arthur Puchen from Toronto, who came climbing down the falls when he was ordered into the lifeboat at the last minute because they needed the extra hand. And he's just a few days short of his 63rd birthday, and he does that. You've got a number of really strong women. You've got the daughter of a congressman from West Virginia. You've got several militant suffragettes from England. The daughter of the man who founded this department store, Saks Fifth Avenue. And they really got into a big fight with Hitchens once they're out on the water because he didn't want to rescue anybody from the water. He didn't want to go back to the ship and get more people. And even though they never ended up doing any of those things, these women really sort of kind of took charge of the lifeboat under Molly Brown's direction before the night was over.
That is pretty incredible.
There's a piece of the actual rope that was used to lower the lifeboats. And right over here, yeah, it's a bit. They use that to tie the ropes around to feed them out so that the boats wouldn't go crashing down to the water. Boats were launched by hand. There's guys on ropes, old school. Okay, so we're gonna head aft. And we're gonna see the spot where the ship's band was playing. So we're now going along where Boat 8 would have been. Boat 8 would be just over here to the right. And actually Boat 8 was kind of cool too. There was the Countess of Roths. And she was kind of a foxy, cool royal who took over the tiller of the boat. There's the remains of its davit right there. The only davit left aft on the deck here, and it's knocked down obviously by tremendous forces when the ship was sinking. Stuff being torn off by cables and rigging, that sort of thing. Yeah, you're going right over the davit. You got a good view of the davit right now. Look at that. So this is where they would have played. I mean, this is on my first dive to Titanic in 1995. We landed here, and I was struck just by the surreal nature of the fact that I was sitting here on this deck of this famous ship that had seemed like a legend to me. And it wasn't a legend anymore. It was a real place. It was a real place where real people had died, where a real tragic event had taken place. And something about looking out at the deck, at this rusty deck that barely looks like anything, and knowing that that's right where the Titanic band had played, it just had a huge effect on me.
One of the unique aspects of the sinking is the fact that the orchestra, the ship's band, came out on deck and played all throughout the sinking. You never hear of that happening in any sort of disaster of any kind, the heroism of musicians keeping people calm and playing ragtime and later quietly beautiful selections. There's a controversy at the end. They played Nearer My God to Thee. Some people say that they played Song d'Automne, another piece. I believe they played Nearer My God to Thee, but the British version, because so many British people claim that they heard Nearer My God to Thee. And Hartley, the band leader, Wallace Hartley, even told someone once that if you're on a sinking ship, that would be the piece that he would play. So I absolutely believe that that was what he did. Every one of them was lost in the end, and they did find Wallace Hartley's body later. And when they returned it to his home in England, more people attended his funeral than actually lived in the town. The public was so caught up with that story.
Now, on an earlier dive, we got into the Marconi room. And Parks, why don't you tell us the significance of that room?
Well, the Marconi transmitter was the voice of the ship, really. If it hadn't been for the Marconi operator's ability to talk to other ships in the area, nobody would have known that Titanic was sinking with the possible loss of all life on board. They couldn't have called for the rescue ships, the Carpathia, that eventually showed up and rescued the survivors.
All right, well, let's take a look at the Marconi room now.
We are just outside the door, which is going to take us to the Marconi room. And we're about to enter that right now and have a look around and try to answer some questions that that have been bothering us since the last expedition here. I think we're in. All right, these are the dynamo. This is the dynamo, which has a motor. It's a motor generator combination. And right ahead of us is the control panel that Parks wants us to image. So it looks like it's still standing. And look at these regulators. This is incredible. You see the knife switch down? The left knife switch is down.
The right one appears to be up, if I'm
The right one is
correctly.
up, but that makes sense. This is the incoming current, and that's the outgoing.
Yeah.
So they were sending right up till the end.
And the settings are still in the same position they were the night it went down.
Yep. This is right where Jonathan Phillips switched off the set. There's the knife switch in the down position. The handle's gone. But the question is, if they worked right up till the end and seawater was pouring in the door, would you stand there and grab the handle on a 440 volt breaker? I don't know too many people that would. So either he was incredibly brave, or they left earlier than Bride said they did later.
The night before the disaster, the Marconi transmitter broke and no messages could be sent out. With a ship full of rich and powerful people all wanting to send news home from the maiden voyage, the two young men did what they were absolutely not supposed to do. They fixed it themselves.
Marconi maintenance manual says you're supposed to go on battery power, which gives you a range of about 80 miles or so, as opposed to the normal 250 plus miles. And the operators were supposed to leave it for a Marconi engineer to fix once they got back ashore. But Phillips and Bride went in there that night, spent 6 hours in the silent room, troubleshooting the fault. They found a short in the secondary winding of the transformer. They fixed it, put it back together, tested it, and the transmitter was as good as new.
This was state-of-the-art technology. These guys, you know, Phillips and Bride, they were like the computer, you know, geniuses, computer geeks of their time. And look at these regulators. This is, you can see the left one is cranked all the way over. They were really trying to get the spark up as much as they could as the ship was dying. You can see it right here. Parks will be able to make something out of this.
Is the wooden handle on that one still intact? It appears to be.
Yeah, let's get up there and see that. And this is what we came here for.
There's something there.
Oh, there's some writing.
There, volts.
Volts, absolutely. Look at that.
Nice. Part of Titanic's technological hallmarks is this.
That's right, and part of what made the story so powerful was the rescue. The people who were saved, the 703 who were saved because of this machine. You know, we're in a wireless age right now. Everybody's, you know, it's wireless everything. But this was the first wireless device. The turn of the last century, it was a wireless age as well, and people were enamored of this technology. There's something there. I don't know what that is, a connector or... Oh, you know what? I think it's just a lamp. That's a light.
It's sitting above to
Yep, so
illuminate.
up here above us should be a...
Sure is.
Yeah, there's where the bulb
There
went.
it is.
Yeah, so that was the light that lit the set, so they could see it.
You know, it's interesting because some of the technology that was being used at this point, that was being created, that was being developed 100 years later, is the same technology that's being used in this very broadcast.
Well, that's a good point.
A wooden crate.
That's not a wooden crate. That is the cover for the disc discharger. Parks' second favorite piece of equipment that he's always going on about, which we're about to go image. There it is. That's the disc. See the disc? Doesn't look like a disc. It looks like a line from where we are.
Absolutely. Yes, yes. That's right.
Now, Parks has managed to somehow piece this all together. Ooh, look, there's some kind of bolts running through that thing. Or maybe those are some kinds of contacts. I'm getting carried away looking. Okay, I'm going to have to break out of this, which I'll do as gently as I can. And that's about as good as I can do there.
What became of the two men in that room?
Well, they stayed really until very nearly the end, until they could hear the water coming up the deck, I think is what Harold Bride said. And both of them left, and they both jumped overboard. Jack Phillips was never seen again, but Harold Bride did survive.
And was he seen as a hero when he got back to home?
Well, they both were, absolutely. Jack Phillips more so for having died, but because they did stay at their posts until the very end and continued to transmit, they were responsible for the rescue of everyone.
Interesting. That is a very critical room in this whole exploration.
We're on the boat deck level. This is really interesting what's right in front of us. Here's another electric boat winch, just like the one on the other side. It's got a railing collapse down over it. There was a guy on board, Colonel Archibald Gracie, and he tells a really amazing story of survival. He's one of these, there are 3 or 4 people who are our kind of black box recorders for what it was like in the last minutes of Titanic to be standing on her deck as the water kind of came up and just washed them away. And his story is pretty dramatic. He was on this deck and people came screaming and running aft, and as the ship started to plunge, the water came racing back across the deck. And he said it picked him up like a wave at the beach, and he reached up and he grabbed up the top of the deck house, right where we're looking right here. And this railing down below us was up on top of the deck house. It's fallen down. But he grabbed this railing and he held on to it. And he forgot to let go, and it actually, you know, he was so freaked out by the moment that it pulled him underwater, and it actually dragged him down. And then he said he felt this huge suction drawing him down, and he was underwater for an endless time. And probably what that was is all the water pouring down like a waterfall inside this grand staircase, and like a you know, toilet bowl of the gods. And somehow he made it to the surface, and he managed to make it to Collapsible B. That's an overturned lifeboat, and he survived. And this is right where that happened. Yeah, and of course so many people didn't survive, but he's one of the few that did. And it seems like everybody that did survive who was actually aboard, who wasn't out safe in a lifeboat someplace, had an incredible story to tell. Hey John, what you're seeing here is actually Captain Smith's quarters, and this is his private bath. He was one of the best captains, most respected captains of the North Atlantic route. This was his retirement voyage. He was going to take the biggest, you know, ship in the world on her maiden voyage and just go out in a blaze of glory. And this is the kind of stateroom that he had. Here's his tub here. You see some of the faucets. Now the plumbing in here is kind of bizarre, isn't it, Ken?
There was a whole different system back then, especially for the captain. I mean, he had hot and cold fresh water and hot and cold salt water. So there was an arrangement there of 4 taps, which a lot of other first-class bathtubs didn't have. But you can also see his sink in the distance on the right. And
right there.
yeah,
That's the marble sink. So it's full of rusticles right now.
a little towel rack just below it, a little rod.
We've moved up to the bridge, and you can see that it's pretty devastated up here. You can see the corner, there's like a wooden baseboard there. That would have been the outline of the wheelhouse. As I come around here to the left, you can see us down below on the forward well deck. That's our light down there where the mirror is. Right in front of us is about the only thing that's still really recognizable on the bridge, and that's called the telemotor. I'll get in a little closer on that. What happened here was that as the ship plunged, as the bow section went down, it went down so fast. There, you can see our mirror now, just down below on the well deck. The ship went down so fast that the currents of water flowing over it snapped the guy wires that hold the mast, and it fell back and hit right here on the bridge, and it shattered the face of the wheelhouse, and the flow of water just tore it all off. So there's not a whole lot left here. It's very, very hard to imagine what this would have looked like. Maybe you guys have some images up there that you can show people what it might have looked like on the day. But there's something, to me, very eerie and I don't know, kind of moving about this one lone monument. The rest of the whole superstructure is just stripped away here, and the only thing remaining is this one monument. Here, I'll put a little light on it so you can see the natural color. And it's made out of bronze. The ship's wheel would have mounted right in that kind of little hole right there. And you know, Gilligan is now pretty much standing right where Quartermaster Hitchens was when he was standing at the ship's wheel, keeping a straight and steady course for New York. And he, you know, unexpectedly heard 3 sharp rings of the crow's nest bell. And that crow's nest would have been, you know, out there in the darkness someplace ahead of him from where you'd stand here on the bridge. And then when the crow's nest guys called, when Frederick Fleet called in, 6th Officer Moody would have answered the phone right over here against that wall. You know, what he heard was Frederick Fleet saying, "Iceberg right ahead."
Yes, what do you see?
Iceberg! Right ahead!
Thank you.
First Officer Murdoch, who was the officer of the watch, I don't think he waited for the telephone to ring when the crow's nest guys called the bridge. I think he already knew what was going on. I think he was already in motion. He would have come running in a door that was right over here, right where that big tangle of wires is. He would have run in and yelled, probably at the top of his lungs, at least I would have, "Hard a starboard." Hitchens says, "Hard a starboard eye," and he starts cranking that big old ship's wheel over. And boy, many, many turns. It was a lot of hard work for him to get that rudder hard over. And, you know, seconds counted so much. And, you know, Murdoch looked out front and saw an iceberg right square in their path. And he had to decide, do I go left or do I go right, you know? And it's not clear whether any decision would have been the right one at that point. I actually think Murdoch was a pretty cool guy. And I think he had a... He bore the burden of all that for the next, you know, 2 hours and 40 minutes of his life, which were the last moments of his life, and he gave his life trying to save people. When we were making the movie, I had a choice to make. I could do it historically correctly, or I could do what people would think was correct. In fact, it was historically correct for a hard starboard order to the helmsman to turn the ship to port, to the left. That was just the way it was in those days. They were called tiller commands, and by starboarding the tiller, you ported the rudder and you turned to port. So the hardest starboard command actually turned the ship to port. So a lot of people thought they were pretty nautical and sent me a lot of letters. You can stop sending the letters. I'm trying to set the record straight right now. We did it right.
Hey, Jim, where exactly are you right now?
We are on the starboard boat deck, and we're looking aft. And what's in front of us right here is a davit, which of course was used to launch the lifeboats. And you can see the bronze lead screw there, and this little square thing on the right side that is where they would have put the crank handle in to crank the davit. And the thing that we found, these davits were made by the Welland-Davit Company. And the thing that we found when we did the movie, because we had exact reproductions of them made by the Welland-Davit Company from their old plans, is that it takes a lot of muscle power to crank these things out. And of course the boats were all launched by hand, the davits were operated by hand, and it took a long time. So this is an interesting davit, probably the most historically interesting site on the boat deck of the ship, because here's where First Officer William McMaster Murdoch struggled so hard to launch not one, but 3 lifeboats off this same davit. He launched boat 1 about in the middle of the whole sinking crisis, and the boat went off with I think 12 people. And Don, how many could have fit in that lifeboat?
Lifeboat 1 had a capacity of 40 people, and in the end it left the ship with only 12 on board, only 5 of whom were passengers, and only 2 of those passengers were women, and primarily Sir Cosmo and Lady Duff Gordon and her secretary, Miss Francatelli. And of course there was the big debate about whether to go back, and I think the crewmen on board deferred to the peerage in the lifeboat, and whereas they of course felt that the crew were in charge. And so even though there was some debate about whether they should go back or not, nothing was ever done, and in the end it looked like the Duff Gordons had sort of commandeered this lifeboat, and Sir Cosmo even paid each of the crewmen £5 just as a charity to get their lives together again afterwards, and it looked as if he'd bribed them. So of course afterwards Sir Cosmo and Lady Duff Gordon, I think, were treated very harshly by the press and really by society in the long run. I think they suffered for this the rest of their lives.
Yeah, I know, it's really interesting. You know, I've always puzzled about that because, you know, Murdoch was a pretty amazing guy, and he was the first one to get boats launched off the ship. He had 2 or 3 of them in the water before the officers on the other side of the ship had any. Well, you know, the thing that's interesting is, you know, here Murdoch is struggling to get 3 boats launched on the same davit, and he's running back and forth. He's actually launching a bunch of boats, but just inboard of this davit, right here where we're looking at the deck, would have been another boat, which was a collapsible boat called Collapsible C. And that boat's interesting too, because into that boat got J. Bruce Ismay. He was the owner of Titanic, and he was the one who probably influenced the captain to keep the pedal to the metal and to be going at full speed through a moonless night, through known ice fields. And you know, here's a guy that jumped into one of the last boats to leave the ship and left 1,500 people on board to die, and that happened right here as well.
Now these lifeboats, guys, they were heavy, weren't they? I mean, they were really heavy, weren't they?
Yes, indeed they were. They were made of elm. It's quite a dense wood, and probably about 2 tons apiece, something along that line.
Jim, a lot of human drama played out right there, didn't it?
Well, yeah, you hit on an interesting thing, because they get the first 2 boats in the water, right? And Murdoch comes over and he looks down this stairwell. It's pretty fallen away right now, but you can actually look down. Maybe I can do it right here. You can look down to the lower deck, which is the promenade deck. Right down this, there would have been stairs here. They're gone now. He sees green water pouring up those steps. The ship has minutes to live before the water comes rushing over the deck. And over here, you can see the deck house is kind of collapsed, but up there on the roof was another lifeboat, that far away, and up on a roof with no lifting tackle, no way to get it down, no ramp, no thought given to how they were going to do that. Murdoch got a bunch of guys, went up on the roof, and I think just the adrenaline kicked in, and they just lifted it, shoved it to the edge, and they slid it down on some oars. And it's just an amazing scene, I think. Right down here on the deck, these people struggling so hard for their lives. And what he did was he cranked this davit back in, because you have to crank them out to lower the boat, and then you have to crank them back in to pick up the next one. So he cranked it back in a 3rd time, and that's just as far as they got before the water washed over them. And you can see that this davit is still in an upright position as opposed to cranked out. In my mind, it's a monument to Murdoch, to his crew, to the entire crew of Titanic that stayed at their posts, that sacrificed their lives. It's in the movie. I made the point about the third class people sort of not faring as well as first class. If you were a third class male passenger, you stood about a 1 in 10 chance of surviving, and if you were a first class female passenger, it was 90%. So it was a big spread. And apparently, by all accounts, there was a near riot. Several hundred people who had realized that the last couple boats on the ship were all the way forward. And they came down and crowded around. The crew had to link arms, pass the women through, and apparently it got pretty violent. The officers had to fire their guns and so on. But the crew did the worst of all. I think, Don, do you remember how many crew members there were on board and how many died?
Well, I think there were about 900 crew members, and off the top of my head, I think there were about 700 of them who passed away.
Pause! Do you see any moving?
Check them, make sure.
These are dead, sir.